I think a lot of docs, they just think, here's the contract, sign it, that's it. The ability to negotiate, that's commonplace, right?
That is very much commonplace. I've always gone in with the position that everything is negotiable.
What's good, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Docs Outside the Box. I am joined by Mr. James Dockery, who is a proud HBCU graduated from North Carolina Central University in 1980, and then went on to get his law degree, JD, from the UNC School of Law in 1983, and also has a master's in law in privacy as well as cybersecurity. Has been spending over 23 years as a judge advocate in the U.S. Air Force, and is now considered basically a labor and employment expert with a great understanding of employment contracts as well as independent contractors, extensive trial experience, having tried over 100 jury trials. I didn't know that about you, James. I did not know that you're a trial lawyer. And for the sake of this conversation, everyone, he has been working in the medical community, working with physicians, nurses, as well as physician assistants since 1997. Without further ado, I welcome James Dockery. James, welcome to Docs Outside the Box. How are you doing?
Hey, Nee, man, I could not be any better. I am feeling fantastic. I listened to the show, and when you said that I'd have an opportunity to come on, I said, when? Just let me know. So I was very, very, very excited to join you and to join your audience as well, to share some insight and perspectives of an attorney with over 40 some odd years of total experience. And so excited.
Well, I also left out that you used to be a bag boy for Walmart, right? That's what you used to do for Walmart? What was it you used to do? That
was my aspirational goal, actually.
What's that one little thing that you used to do for Walmart, which I think puts the cherry on top of all of the things that I already described for you?
Yeah, I was associate general counsel at Walmart. It's a great company, great opportunity there, particularly when you're representing, a company with over 2 million employees. It was an incredible experience that really prepared me to do a number of other things post that experience at Walmart.
So basically, you know your stuff.
I do.
you know the law, employment, independent contracting. And the reason why I have you on this show is, and real quick disclaimer, everyone, me and James have been working together for close to 10 years now. We initially started working together, at least you started working with Renee through the Student National Medical Association.
Right.
You were actually an attorney on retainer, excuse me.
Correct.
I believe. Correct. And Renee has always been really instrumental with SNMA. I have been too, but really Renee has been instrumental with taking that student organization to another level. And then the next step in our relationship was you negotiated our first contracts when we were employed back in 2014 to 2017. And then me and Renee got this itch with going locums, and you helped us craft contracts and helped us negotiate certain rates. And I think you can see us going from, I know there was some painful times when you saw how much you were asking to get paid. And I'm sure you're like, why are these guys asking for so low, to where we are at right now. And I know it's been a long process, but you've been with us the entire process, the entire way. For over 10 years.
And which is what I love, because we built this relationship from the ground up, and we continue to have this relationship. So not only do we work together from an attorney-client relationship, but we're also friends. And so from that perspective, and there are times when I pick up the phone and call Renee, I have this issue I'd like to talk to you about. Or I call Nee or you and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. And so from that perspective, we built this relationship. But that's also what I like about all of my physician clients as well, is that I tell them from the very beginning, this isn't a one and done. We're in this relationship for the long haul. And so from that perspective, my plan is to work very hard for them and that we have a long-term goal that can be shifted, can be changed, but at the end of the day, we're working collaboratively to help the client achieve their long-term, their short-term, as well as their long-term objectives.
And you've also seen us grow into podcasting and social media. You've given us advice in that. So this relationship spans a lot of different arenas. And I think more and more doctors, that's going to happen to them where, not only are they going to be, having to negotiate for what they do clinically, but maybe their expertise and what they do in media, what they do entrepreneurially, there's going to be just multiple facets of this. So obviously, I think we kind of let the cat out the bag as to what we're going to be talking about on this show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, James.
Which is great because, at the end of the day, as people say, you need a great physician always with you to be able to pick up the phone and call your physician and be able to have that relationship. You also need to have that same kind of relationship with your attorney as well. That your attorney should be someone that is responsive, somebody that you can pick up the phone, and even with interesting and unique ideas to say, we're going to go from surgery to doing podcast. Let's talk about that. Okay, let's talk about that and let's understand. But my role is to help facilitate your goals and your objectives.
All right. Well, let's start off like, residents, or when you finish medical school and you go and become a resident, usually your first year, second year, even all the way to when you finish, there's really never a chance where you sign a contract. It's just kind of understood that, your relationship with a hospital, your relationship with a residency program just renews, right? And then you go into fellowship, you apply, and then you get in, and you may do an additional 1 to 2 years. So the first time that a medical student, a resident, a doctor may see like a contract, maybe right when they finish their training and they're looking for their first job. Why do they need a lawyer? Why do you recommend that they have a lawyer to look at this contract? They didn't need one before. Why do you think they need one now?
Well, think about it this way. So this brand new contract, either with a hospital or with a clinical group or some other facility, that document that they just presented to you has been prepared by a team of lawyers. And those lawyers have a particular client. That client being either the hospital or that particular practice group. And so from that perspective, are you ready, willing, and able to accept each and every word within that contract that was prepared by your future employer's lawyer? Because quite frankly, that in and of itself means that you're already at a disadvantage when you're doing that, because their interest is not purely your interest. Their interest is in their client's interest. So you need someone on the other side to balance that out, to make certain that whatever is written in that contract, the terms and conditions within that contract, you are comfortable with. You've had an opportunity to have a lawyer to have eyes on the agreement so that at the end of the day, you're protected. Your long-term as well as your short-term goals are protected within that agreement.
So I think a lot of docs, they don't think that that's negotiable, or they don't think that that contract that they get, like there's like space in there. I think they just think, here's the contract, sign it, and that's it. So the ability to negotiate, or the ability to say, I don't like this, or this is good, that's commonplace, right?
That is very much commonplace, and you know that as well. And so from that perspective, I've always gone in and represented clients with the position that everything is negotiable, that you have an opportunity to really begin to think about what do you want? What is important for you within that particular contract? Is it the compensation? Are you comfortable with the compensation? Are you comfortable with the time off? In one instance, we were able to negotiate for a client repayment of student loans within that contract. Had never been thought of before, but we made the push and justified it appropriately with the client, with the company, with the hospital at the time, was that it made sense for them to invest long term in this particular physician to pay off their student loan debt. That created great relationship between the physician as well as the hospital itself. So everything can in fact be negotiated. And so, but there are also certain terms in which there are things in which you can't negotiate. But you go into these agreements with the mindset that everything is negotiable.
And also that you have just as much agency as the hospital. Like, you're an entity that has something to lose, so to speak, as well as the hospital has something to protect also. And I think I had a hard time believing that at first. I was like, oh, I thought that I didn't look at us as equal and separate parties. It almost felt like I was coming to the table, they were bringing me the menu, and it was really just my job to decide if I was going to eat or not. Whereas I think more people should look at it as, well, I don't really like the broccoli. Can you give me something else? Or, I like
Great
this,
analogy.
Right?
Great analogy, because you have value. Each physician, nurse, medical assistant, physician assistant, you have value. You have skills that you bring to the table that they really, really want. And so from that perspective, understand your value to the organization, and also understand that because you have value, you also have the ability to negotiate. You have the ability to your point, to say, I'm not particularly thrilled with the broccoli, but I can take asparagus instead, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Asparagus is one of my favorite things, so
Oh, okay.
I'm
cool. You're cool with that.
So what is contract review? Because I think that's another thing that people are just like, well, like, what does this mean? Contract review, contract negotiations, that's one and the same thing, right? Like, explain that to me. What does that mean?
Okay. And so, for instance, the contract review is you have this document. In fact, most physician contracts are between 16 and 20 pages long. And you have some incredible legal terms in there. Force majeure.
That's legalese, right?
All that legalese is like,
right.
Okay, now if you went to medical school and law school, you may get it. Okay.
Right.
And then there's always this, and I get to your point, there's always this desire to say, ooh, I have a cousin who's a lawyer, and my cousin,
cousin TT,
cousin Jumba, cousin Baby.
Yeah.
My cousin who is a lawyer, he's going to review my contract in that regard. Yes, your cousin who's a lawyer could probably review the contract, but there are unique nuances with regards to employment agreement. And so from that perspective, one of the things that I will do with each of my clients, I will walk them through each sentence of that agreement, from the very beginning. And keep in mind, this is between 16 and 20 pages long. And so walk them first through the agreement and say, let's talk about this. Let's identify, what is your sweet spot? What drives you? What motivates you? What is important to you? Those are the kinds of questions that need to be asked very early on. And then when we get those answers, then we can walk through the contract very specifically. Then we identify what are those areas that I have some concerns with. And so from that perspective, one of the key components with regards to negotiating a contract, first of all, you want to read the contract and be very specific as to your interests, one. And then two, negotiating the contract is rather different, because now you are looking at as a physician, spending time talking to administrators, possibly lawyers, and others to determine, to convey what you are really interested in and what you really want to do. That requires an additional set of skills, because at that point in time, it can become really very emotional. You're thinking, wait a second, I believe I should have an extra $100,000, or that
I'm doing all the bonus operations. I'm taking out the appendixes at 2:00 in the morning. You going home at 5 in the afternoon. Right? You're going to get personal about it. You're going to get pissed. Yeah.
And so from that point of view, it's like, why the heck are you not? Why don't you see this? A lawyer, on the opposite hand, can convey that very same message without losing the relationship as well. Because you can always, when the administrator comes back to the physician and say, you're driving some really hard bargains. This lawyer seems to be very unreasonable. You can say, well, that's my lawyer. That's that guy.
Yeah.
Continue to work with him. He's giving me advice. You maintain the relationship at that point in time. Let the attorney be the bad guy. in
Gotcha.
that regard. And ultimately, in more times than not, the parties can come together and recognize that there is value in bringing on this physician because of your skill, talent, expertise, and that the physician is also very much interested in working at this particular facility. Now, also physicians need to be prepared to be able to walk away as well.
Okay.
Be prepared to walk away because that whole meal might just not work very well. It might not be appetizing. And so from that perspective, your value is in your ability to, or your attorney's ability to be able to negotiate effectively, but also understand your value to the point where you can just simply walk away.
How long does all of this take? Like, how long does a contract to get reviewed? How long does that usually take on average?
On average, I've been able to close the deal from beginning to end within a matter of several weeks, but it can take at least a month, maybe possibly two. But here's the biggest concern with regards to that. If you're on the verge of renewing a contract, you have to be particularly careful because the contract terms will specifically come to an end at a specific point. Now, I have one particular point I want to raise. So for instance, contract renewals. I've reviewed a contract for a physician in which this language was used. This contract will automatically renew at the same terms and conditions unless physician negotiates additional terms within 90 days of the termination date. Let's assume as the physician, you're busy, you're doing surgery, you're doing a number of things. You simply forget, 3 years earlier that you have this agreement. Within that 90-day period of time, if you do not renegotiate, then you have effectively signed another contract under the same terms and conditions that you had 3 years prior to that. You have to be very careful. You have to be able to negotiate that within that period of time. Otherwise, you lose the ability to increase your compensation. You lose the ability to do any number of things, increase your bonus structure, et cetera. So it becomes very, very important that as you're negotiating or as your attorney is negotiating to be mindful of clauses such as that. One of the things that's important is that all too often the devil is in the details. So you have to be very, very mindful of making certain that you're protecting all of your interests.
Now, is there a difference between getting your contract reviewed and then doing contract negotiations? Because I've seen that on certain websites for lawyers where they'll have, well, this is how much contract review costs, and then this is what the negotiations will cost also. So explain to us how that works and what's the difference?
Certainly, the review process is fairly straightforward. You're spending the time with the physician client, with the physician client in my particular case, and you are working through the terms and conditions of the contract. Once you provide that information to the client, that's the end that's the end effectively of that relationship for that particular period of time. Then the client basically establishes their own case to their employer or to the facility. On the other hand, where the attorney actually negotiates the work, that means more time, more effort. It is more time working with either the lawyers or the hospital administrator. So from that perspective, it expands the amount of time in which the attorney is working on behalf of the client. So it is more time, more effort, greater negotiating opportunities that just simply takes more time. So time is really the key component there.
And I would tell everyone, from my opinion, I tend to be a little bit emotional about these things. And I think as a lawyer, that there's a difference between equating self-worth with what a salary is. And I think I'm not prepared for that, right? Like, I don't know how to separate that. So when they offer me a certain amount and it's not what I really want, it's going to be hard for me to just be like, all right, let's take a chill pill. This is what they normally do. They possibly may offer something that is lower. They may offer something that is not what you would normally expect. But the key things, and I'm sure there's certain levels of engagement or activities of engagement that you know that you can walk into and you can take, and tools that you can use. Whereas me as a physician, I don't have that. And I think, one of them being like, the person who talks to first, or the person who says something first, or, obviously I'm sure one of them is try not to be emotional about things. And the reason I say that is because I tend to just say, look, James, can you do not only the review, but can you also do the negotiations? Because I think, from my temperament and doing things in between cases or with how busy I am, I just don't think I'll be speaking from an area of strength. And
one of the key components to that knee is what is being able to identify your sweet spot. And so identify
you've mentioned that to me a couple of times
and say, okay, let's negotiate at a higher level, because again, this is about negotiating where the facility will have one perspective. You have a perspective in terms of what actually works for you, the client, in this particular case. And then let's have something that is not outrageous, but terms and conditions that is difficult to say no to. And then you can negotiate down to your sweet spot.
See, that scares people. I think that scares a lot of doctors because they're not used to negotiating. So it's really interesting to get your perspective. So let's say, for example, like you say your sweet spot is, I'm going to make a number up, $50 an hour. Right, you're saying that you should go a little bit higher, knowing that there may be some space to come down exactly to your sweet spot. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Because you go a little higher, it's about negotiating where the hospital will need to either come up to meet you at a certain point, and then it is that give and take. It is my relationship with you, the client, but then also it is being able to sit. Again, keep in mind, I've tried over 100 cases. So it's a matter of negotiating while selling as well, because I want to be able to put you in a position to where I can say, Dr. X has these skills, qualities, and abilities, and deserves this amount of compensation or whatever we're negotiating at. And as a result of that, you need to pay him or her this requisite amount of money, either for locums or for base salary, or if it is an independent contractor, what does that actually look like? But it's a matter of negotiating. It is utilizing those trial advocacy skills that would convince a jury to do exactly what I want them to do, what we would want them to do.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because I want to bring in this next topic and I want to set the stage. So, how much does this cost? Let's talk money. How much does it cost to do this on average?
Now, I'm going to give you the best lawyer answer possible.
It depends, I bet you.
It depends. You've been around me way too long, Nick. Come on now. So it depends. Yeah, and there are a lot of factors that will go into it. It will go into years of experience, both from the attorney as well as from the physician. It goes into the difficulty of the contract, the complexity of the contract, the length of time that it will take to review. There are so many different factors. All too often, most attorneys will charge either a flat fee or an hourly rate. Hourly rates can range from, $300 an hour up to $700-800 an hour, depending upon that particular attorney's value of their time, because this is an attorney's stock and trade is their time for the most part. I like using a flat fee approach in large measure because then I'm not looking at the clock, nor is the client looking at the clock. So we're not rushing through it. We're not saying, oh, there are 4 hours. We've spent 4 hours on this document already, and now I'm at roughly $1,000 as an example, just using it as an example. But the flat fee allows us to avoid this watching the clock, and it gives me a sense and the client a sense that we're both vested in this matter. Let's sort of work together to make it the best way.
I can tell you right now, there's people listening who are like, good Lord, $300 an hour. Right.
Oh, that's cheap, brother.
Okay. So they've been paying for med school, and they've been paying student loans or whatever it may be, in residency. Convince them as to why they should pay these fees. Why should they pay for a lawyer to help them negotiate something? I have my answer. I know why I want to do it. So I'll let you give your answer. But I'm really interested to see how you convince a resident or even a young attending to get a lawyer.
The fact that it goes back to something I said very early on. If you think about it for a second, your employer has invested thousands of dollars in hiring their own lawyer to negotiate and represent them. Aren't you that valuable? Think about it for a second. You spent 4 years in college, 4 years in med school, residency. You have much more training and education than any professional athlete, and almost every professional athlete will have someone negotiating the deal for them. You are much more valuable in society in general than any professional athlete will ever be.
So I say outside of telling someone to take out their own appendix, that's like as a doctor, you wouldn't tell someone to take out their own appendix. You'd be like, exactly. No, you need to come to an expert and stuff. So exactly. And so use an expert, and in actuality, the cost is minimal compared to the benefits, the long-term benefits, because again, you're looking at opportunities to negotiate a deal on behalf of a physician that he or she may not know is really fully negotiable. As I mentioned early on, we've negotiated bonus structures. We've negotiated additional compensation. We've negotiated repayment of student loans, all the kinds of things that are outside of the original contract. And so here's another major component to that. One of the things that you really want to be very cautious of is the various termination clauses within the contract. Are you terminated for cause? Let's get into that.
Are you terminated not for cause? Under those circumstances,
that's that legalese stuff that a lot of people don't understand.
Stuff, for cause. And here's the other major component to that: non-compete agreements. Non-compete. At the end of the contract, are you able to actually work in the same city, in the same region, in the same neighborhood as you did when you were with a particular company or with a particular organization, hospital or clinic or practice group?
What's the rationale behind a non-compete? Since you jumped into that, let's segue right into that. Why would a hospital tell you that you can't compete with them? Like, what's the rationale behind that? It's that word compete. And so from that perspective, these are businesses, and so, not only just a hospital, but even a practice group, for instance. So let's assume you're a member of an OBGYN practice group, and let's use Dallas as an example. You're a member of an OBGYN practice group in Dallas, and you want to start your own practice down the street. You built a great client base, and you want to be able to do that. That non-compete says, no, we do not want you to take our patients. We do not want you to take our patients with you because it's a revenue stream. And so from that perspective, what companies, I use companies, but what practice groups and hospitals will do is to say, you are limited for a period of time in terms of practicing in this particular area. Most states frown upon non-compete agreements. Now, and there are some instances where they are, in fact, valid, but they need to be very narrowly focused and very narrowly created. And so that's part of the role that the lawyer plays in this, is to make certain that non-compete is valid. I represented a client where there was a non-compete in which the client could not practice law in the state of Texas. It's like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, not
the state of Texas.
Medicine. You cannot practice medicine in the state of Texas. Outrageous, crazy. They
didn't sign the contract, did they?
Oh, no. You
don't want to attach your name to that, right?
No, I wasn't not about to attach my name to that. But ultimately,
but how is that legal?
It wasn't legal, but they were more than happy. That particular that particular entity was more than happy to put that in the agreement with the hope that somebody would not take it to a lawyer to review. Now,
Wow.
let's then assume that physician did not come to a lawyer at the front end and pay a couple of $1,000s for that legal fee on the front end. On the back end, to get that non-compete agreement would have been 10 times that amount. To get that non-compete agreement overturned in court would be 10 times that amount. So therefore, that instance of pay me now or possibly pay me later or pay me much more later becomes very, very relevant.
So what are some of the mistakes you see when docs kind of decide to do things by themselves? Like I'm talking about contract review and negotiation outside of, obviously not coming to you, but what are the things that you see that they make?
One big issue, non-competes. That is a huge component to the negotiation process. Understanding the termination provisions within the contract themselves. When can the doctor actually terminate the provision unilaterally? Under what circumstances can that occur? So there's that. And it's also that some of the tax implications with regards to whether or not you're going to be an employee or you're going to be an independent contractor. And so some of those actually factor into the process. And then if you're going to do locums, for instance, then are you going to be locums as an employee? You're going to be locums as an independent contractor. And that's actually come up a lot. If you go to like Facebook forums, there are a lot more doctors who are interested in being independent contractors. So I think they bring it up to a hospital. A hospital figures out, quote unquote, how to do it, and a contract gets sent to them. But there's a lot of employment language that's in there, but they're considered to be an independent contractor. And the reason why we know this is like a lot of them will write this in the group. They're like, yeah, I said that I wanted to be an independent contractor and they said A, B, C, D. And I'm like, well, they can't tell you what your schedule is supposed to be. No, they can't, all these different things that you have that you're describing. These makes are you like an employee. Right. Yeah. Makes you an employee, which then creates even much more significant tax implications, both for the physician, both for the physician as well as for the hospital. Because as an independent contractor, you're supposed to manage your own taxes. You're supposed to, 1099, et cetera. And so, from that perspective, that is a major component to that. So, from the hospital perspective, they really should make certain that you're truly an independent contractor and not an employee, because then that opens them up to even greater liability because they're failing to pay the necessary taxes, withholding taxes on this doc or nurse or physician assistant. So it becomes very important that as you look at that agreement, make certain that the provisions that indicate that you're an employee are stricken from that document. You really need to be an independent contractor where you make certain decisions on your own outside of those required by the facility. So let's take a quick step back, actually a big step back. So someone's listening and saying, hey, that's great, Doc. I don't know any lawyers, or I don't know how to find the right lawyer. Like, how does someone properly vet a lawyer? What kind of questions would you expect them to be asking you so that they can delineate properly, this is the lawyer that I should be going with versus this is the lawyer that I may need to pass by and find someone else? Pass go. Yeah. Like, for instance, your cousin that is a lawyer. Don't have any family members. Well, first of all, that's that could in fact be a major problem with regards to Thanksgiving. If you hire a lawyer from your family and they sort of jack up your contract in that regard. Is it the same thing in law? Is it the same thing in law where, because like in medicine, we tend not to primarily treat our family members. Is it the same thing in law where you tend not to provide advice to your family members? As lawyers, we almost always provide advice to the family members. And so, for instance, it's just one of those things where, somebody picks up the phone and says, hey, guess what? You're my cousin twice removed. I have this deal. Can you look at it for me? and you're the only lawyer in the family. As a black attorney, there are all too often members. We're limited in terms of the number of lawyers that might be within a particular family. And in all
Correct.
likelihood, you're going to help them out. So, from that perspective, it's tough to turn down a family member, but resist the temptation to go with somebody who is purely a criminal lawyer or
Okay.
a real estate lawyer or somebody
Divorce
who
lawyer.
does divorce work to do your contract, because the contracts, the legal community has become really very specialized in many, many respects. And so you really want to know what's your background in terms of employment law? What's your background in terms of negotiating contracts? What's your background in terms of, more specifically, doing work for the medical community? Because even that is unique. I've been working with physicians and physician practices for over 20 years. And so from that perspective, you really want somebody who really understands the nuances of the healthcare facility, the healthcare practice. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a physician, but I've worked with physicians in many, many instances over the years. And so I goofed that up and said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a physician. I may play one on television, but I'm very definitely a lawyer. So indeed.
Have you had to fire, because you've worked with a lot over the last 20 years, have you had to fire a client?
We have, with regards to clients, we have seen a parting of the ways.
I see you going into your Obama. I've seen you go into your Obama bag where you're trying to figure out a way to answer a question. I see it.
Yeah. We have had a parting of the ways. I don't know if I'd call it firing of a client, but we have negotiated that we just simply can't necessarily see eye to eye on matters going forward. So if I'm in the same league as Obama, then I'm in good company then.
Okay.
Very good.
So, and usually when you see that, is that with maybe the physician is asking for too much or maybe asking for too little, or which end of the spectrum do you think it usually ends where you're like, look, we can't agree. We're going to have to move on?
It's typically me in those instances where the physician has been accused of doing something inappropriate, and that the physician either wants me to advance in a solution or a strategy that is ethically unsound. And so from that perspective, it just becomes a matter of do we go down that path? And I have in a couple of instances said, no, we just cannot collaborate together to go down a path that would either worsen the physician's position or put my law license in jeopardy.
Really? So it's gotten that bad?
Yeah, it has.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Well,
that's when we have
hard
a
stop.
parting of the ways at that point.
Let me take a moment to talk about our relationship and big you up. So I don't know if you remember, but my first contract 10 years ago, or about 9 years ago, I got offered a certain amount. I ended up hiring you, and you actually got me an $80,000 swing with my contract, with my salary. Well, actually, with a combination of salary and student loan payback. Mm-hmm. So we were able to go up about $50,000 on my salary, and then you were able to help me get an additional $30,000 of student loan repayback. So 10 per year. And I was really grateful for that because there were certain things, like you said, that were important outside of just the salary. And I think nowadays people are starting to really understand the concept of golden handcuffs. And oftentimes those golden handcuffs, which can be what do you call it? I'm sorry, which could be what's the word I want to use? It's what is it? A bonus. Yeah. These bonuses, they're actually loans, right? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that real quick. Is there any way that you can get a sign-on bonus without it being a loan?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And purely the true sign-on bonus should be an actual bonus. But I've seen recently where practice groups or hospitals are tying it to just that. that they equate it as a loan, and that if you fail to get to a certain point, or either within the terms of the contract, or you fail to produce in terms of the number of hours, the number of patients seen, et cetera, they can.
I haven't seen that one. That's bad.
They can
That's scary.
take that money. They can actually take that money back in that regard. Those kinds of agreements, quite frankly, those kinds of practice groups and practice areas, I tell clients just to stay away from. Because that to me is a sham in that regard. And so from that perspective, it becomes very important that a signing bonus is just that, a signing bonus. Now, the other component that where bonuses become really important is where is called either an incentive bonus, and I call those the invisible bonus structure, because it looks good. It looks like, oh, wow, at the end of the year, if I do X, Y, and Z and I meet these parameters, I will take home an additional $100,000.
Yeah, I've heard this.
But the problem with that is nobody gets it, because the threshold limit is so incredibly high that unless you're going to work literally, 15 hours a day, almost 6 or 7 days a week, you're just simply not going to be able to generate that kind of service for that particular entity to get the bonus. So it becomes very early. Go ahead,
I've also seen it where you're absolutely right, but I've also seen it where there's not a checks and balances to even make sure that you are hitting those numbers. Like, there's no way there's nothing in the contract that says, well, every 3 months or every 6 months, we will check the RVUs to do this, or we will have a coder, an independent coder, come in and look at X, Y, and Z to show that you are reaching these numbers. So it becomes, like you said, this imaginary bonus, right? If you hit this certain production line, but nobody's checking for it anyway.
Yeah, and particularly the RVU structure can be very problematic if nobody is giving you any sense as to, are you on target? And then what do you need to be on target in order to get the bonus at the end of the year? And so, and there are some instances where bonuses are paid every quarter. But what happens during a quarter if you miss the bonus? I've seen one contract where they will retroactively take money from you.
I've seen that.
Again, where they will take money from you because you failed to maintain that same level. And so from that perspective, there are just some agreements that are just in and of themselves, just untenable. And that physicians need to be fully aware of when they are, that sometimes that going back to that devil in the details, they need to be fully aware that just because it looks good on its face, that may not necessarily be what you ultimately receive at the end of the year. So just have to be very, very cautious.
What about the standard contracts? And I've been seeing that a lot with the larger hospital conglomerates, where they'll say, this is the standard contract that we give either for your specialty, or this is just the standard contract that we give for physicians. And because of that, there's no room for negotiations. I heard that 10 years ago. And I know that more so now, definitely in the Northeast, and I think definitely in the West Coast, you see a lot of hospitals that are merging together. So the wiggle room, or what appears to be the ability to get maybe one hospital in one region to compete with another hospital, maybe in a close region, that's not there anymore. So what do you do in those situations? Do you have room? Like when they say it's a standard contract, do I just trust them and say, okay, well, let me just sign it down the line and move on?
No, I go back to that position need that everything is negotiable. You need to begin that process with understanding that, one, everything is negotiable, and that, one, if you fully understand your value, do your homework as well. And so from it, what I mean by doing your homework, find out what other physicians are earning within that particular market, and make certain that that is a market, one, that you really want to be in. Because again, if you are tied to a particular region of the country, if you're tied to a particular city or you're tied to a particular locale, your bargaining position is significantly impacted in that regard. But if you have the ability to be able to say, I'm going to do something different, or if you have the ability to say, well, I'm going to wait and do locums, I'm going to do other kinds of contract work instead, then you're not held to this is our contract and it becomes a take it or leave it. I take the position, and I encourage clients to take the position that you are a very valuable commodity, and that they really want you much more than they are ready, willing, and able to admit. But just be prepared to make some tough and hard decisions that will ultimately serve you very, very well.
I'm going to take my knife and fork and I'm out. I'm walking away. Sometimes.
Sometimes you have to do that.
Okay. Here's another question that I have. What about the person who comes to you and says, hey, I signed this contract and I know that what I signed, there's some language in there that I think I want taken out, right? Is it always true that once you sign it, that's it? Like everything is legally binding? Because I know you mentioned very briefly, like there's an opportunity, for example, to fight restrictive covenants. But I don't know if you remember the contract that for the first place that we signed with as an employee. Do you remember, or the employee contract that we had? Do you remember where it said, if I, as a clinician, work, or if Knee Darko works in any other capacity outside of this hospital and earns any type of income as a physician or using his clinical knowledge, that income belongs to that hospital. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
and we got that.
Remember that.
And we got that taken out, right? But if someone signs that, go ahead, please.
Yeah, the reason why we were successful in that particular instance is because it's illegal.
Okay.
I take the approach that that some of the provisions almost put the physician in a position of servitude as opposed to an employee or an independent contractor. And I use that term servitude, but I could very easily use that term of, slavery ended a long time ago, and so from that point of view, it is no, there are certain instances where it is just on its face illegal, and you bring that to the hospital or the practice group's attention, and they don't want that kind of a fight. They don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring lawyers in order to defend something that on its face is actually illegal. And so from that perspective, again, keep in mind, this contract was created with for the benefit of the practice group or the benefit of the hospital. That's why it was created. And so all the more reason why physicians and people in the medical community must have someone on the front end to look at those agreements, because they're not created for their benefit. They're created for the employer's benefit.
And that's a big deal nowadays, because there's so many docs who are going on social media, who are going into entrepreneurial aspects, who may also be going on TV and talking about things from a clinical standpoint, and they may be getting income from all of these other sources. And if you're not willing to fight, or if you're not willing to know, if you don't have the wherewithal to get someone to review this and say, you need to get this taken out of the contract, they may be willing to forfeit all that money. I know of one of the residents that I worked with. I won't say what level they are, but I know one of the residents that happened to him. He was at a hospital. He was working. He was employed. And during the time off, he would go and do locums, and he was doing well. And somehow his home hospital found out. And I don't know if he decided not to fight it. I don't know if he just said, I just want to make it go away. But he told me he forfeited like a significant amount of some six-figure amount. And I'm like, wait, what? You should have talked to someone about this. Yeah. And that brings me back to what I saw in my contract. And I'm like, actually, this is a lot more common than I thought it was, actually. I thought I was just like, this had to be some type of remnant or some type of thing that just was unique to me.
Yeah. I'm glad that there is the social media component that enables, clients, physicians, and others to begin to talk to each other about what is actually going on within a particular practice, within a particular state, because it, stuff that happens to you and other physicians, that's not always unique in and of itself. And so from that perspective, that old adage that, you need to have a family physician or someone that you can actually, talk to. You also need that family attorney as well. That person that you can pick up the phone and call. You've called me, and we've talked on Sundays, we talked on Saturdays, and so I've always taken the position that with a client,
James, this hospital's acting crazy. They're acting crazy, James. Yo, how do I get my blood pressure down?
At the end of the day, hey, I'm there. I want to be there and want to be in a position to say, let's chill out. We can handle this. We got this. And we work through it in that regard. So you need to be able to have your attorney on speed dial. Whoever that attorney is, have them on speed dial and be able to reach out to them. And if that attorney isn't that available, you need to find another attorney.
All right, let's do this real quick. Over the last 20 years, student loans have skyrocketed like crazy. In terms of priority, if you were to give people advice, student loan repay back or try to get as much salary that you can get, which one is a priority for you and when you advise your clients?
Well, that goes back to what is the priority for the client, So from that perspective, it's just because I'm the mouthpiece for the client. I'm the person that's going to do what is your sweet spot? Going back to that same position that we took even with you years ago. What is your sweet spot, and where do you want to end? And if it's important to get, I had a client over the last 5 years or so, it was important for him, for that client to have his student loans paid off. That was important. And so from that perspective, we negotiated a deal to where had an incredible salary, but that the hospital was genuinely interested in keeping this particular physician. They paid off his student loans. So, from that perspective, it becomes and that paying off that student debt was very, very important to that particular physician. Very important.
All right. Well, look, we are at the end of this discussion. This was great. This is dope. Audience, I hope you guys got a lot. This was literally a masterclass into contract negotiations and understanding what your interests are in comparison to what the hospital or maybe your private practice interests are. So, James, how do people get in contact with you? How do they ask questions if they want to take things further past this podcast episode?
I tell you what, just shoot me an email, jdockery at doclawgroup.com, initial J, DOCKERY at doclawgroup.com.
Guys, we are going to have this in the show notes. But remember, listen, this show is all about empowerment. And that's what this episode is about, is teaching you how to not necessarily be paralyzed by the legalese or even just, walking into a situation that you may not understand and maybe signing a contract blindly. We're giving you the options. We're giving you the power to really take the next step and have the life as well as the career that you want. So, James Dockery, thank you so much for jumping on Docs Outside the Box. Once again, everybody, we're going to have his contact information in the show notes. He is the truth. Please take this podcast episode to heart and share this with other people who may be getting towards the end of their residency or maybe going into a contract negotiation and may need some help. So, James, thanks again for your help on this show.
Appreciate you, my
we'll
brother.
take it from there. Yeah, man, this is dope.
All right. Take care. Later. Bye-bye.